Welcome to the 5th episode of Teachers in the Hall. I'm Erin Lark, and I have a healthy obsession for houseplants and agricultural economics.
And I'm John Zingali. I enjoy working on my house, NPR, and my new obsession, espresso. We're back with another episode recording in the studio here in the Vancouver Public Schools. Before we move into the topics, we want to thank those who listen, share, and talk about this podcast. We appreciate each mention and love to connect with each and every one of you. On our radar this week is a term that's surfacing again and again on chats, posts, and tweets, the lawnmower parent. Many of us remember the term helicopter parent, and this is the next level. As I dig deeper into it, it's kind of interesting to see how these terms have evolved over the years, because I remember when I first heard helicopter parent, I was like, "What? Was my mother one of those?" But I don't think she was. But we have those parents that hover over and are kind of overseeing everything. Parents are no longer satisfied to stay close to their child's lives. They're focused on removing challenges altogether, and that's the difference between a helicopter who just kind of hovers versus this new idea of a lawnmower who helps remove challenge or cuts the grass for their children. We have to wonder, if we remove all of the productive struggle or times where a kid might face failure, will they have less stress now, but is that going to support them later on down the road when they're adults and parents aren't there to take care of those situations for them?
And we're both parents. And we know firsthand how hard it is to watch your child have to experience pain, frustration, and strife in their lives. And you want everything to be roses and rainbows for them. But you really have to play the long game. And as a teacher, someone who wants to work with families to make struggle at school as reasonable, purposeful, and safe as possible, a learning process, it's really difficult to serve children who've had that whole need to work erased from their existence.
We see these types of parents in every aspect of life, but I know sports is definitely one of them. You have so many parents, my child needs to play, they're a starter, they're all of these things. No matter what the skill level is of that child, there's certain parents out there that dominate the sidelines and get in the coaches' faces and rant and rave about their kids and have these high expectations because maybe they were that athlete or they did something, they were good when they were younger. But what does that do to a child's psyche as they move forward? Are they putting unfair expectations on them, and the kid is scared of not living up to these massive expectations? Or do they just have this sense of entitlement to them? There's many different avenues that this can go. But we definitely see it in sports, and it's starting to see it in the classroom a little bit, maybe.
And there was a New York Times article last year that added a sort of parallel term, the snowplow parent. And as you can infer, this type of, I'm going to call it control, is suggested to be a very unhealthy situation for child and parent alike. And just like you were talking about with sports, when you're coming in and insisting on a situation that's not naturally how a learning experience would go, whether that's sports or academics, for the student, they're not experiencing that normal moment to balance skill with teaming and opportunity. And then parents, instead of learning with your child and trusting the process and being a support, you're just getting rid of all of that, in which case that can happen down the road. When they become adults, as we've seen in some of those court cases that have come out with parents who paid crazy amounts of money. Aunt Becky. Crazy amounts of money to make a smoother pathway for their kid because they can. And it's not about telling people who have the ability, have the time, have the money to be supportive of their kid, because that's something that we enjoy doing when we have resources to support our kid. Awesome. You want to be able to do that. That's why you worked hard for them. But at the same time, what is that leading to? So I think that these moments when parents are deciding how to handle a situation, we have to do a self-check on why we need that level of control Is it my fear of, what if my daughter fails? How's she going to feel? Is she going to be miserable? Is she never going to want to try to risk things again? Am I distrusting of the other professional adult who's helping the situation, whether it's a coach or a teacher or something like that? Why do I not trust them to have a plan and play for her? Or is it just a want, like you talked about? We want wonderful things for our kids. We want this awesomeness to happen to them. And we have to realize that life is not, the Trolls movie, 365 days a year.
And it's one thing to pay for a tutor for your kid for the SAT versus paying someone else to take the test for them.
Yeah.
I mean, that's two totally different things. Wanting your child to be successful and having the means to get them a nice tutor and like all these things so that they can learn the material and go through those things is quite different than paying someone else to take the test.
To do it for them.
One is very, maybe it's a bit helicopter-ish,
Yeah.
But I think, that's coming from a place of love, probably, and, if you have the means to do that, far be it from me to tell you how to, support your child. But there's another one where the snowplow or the lawnmower like, hey, I'm going to just have someone do this for you. And just remove that barrier.
It's about obliterating opportunities. It's not just making them easier, it's getting rid of them altogether. So they're not going to learn necessarily. And the other issue with that is that's kind of what being a kid is for, is that whole falling down in the dirt, crying for a moment, brushing yourself up, standing up, and going on again, because adulthood's going to remove a lot of that cushioning, that safety. And if you've never had those, dirt in your knees, skin, palms, all that, it's going to be a really hard lesson to learn. And so while you're kind of removing some barriers, you may in fact end up being the biggest barrier for your kid's life.
When Scarlett fell from a ladder at the playground, I was like, oh my God, what's happening? But she also learned about gravity, and she dusted herself up, and she was a little apprehensive getting back up, but you have to go through those things. It's how we move forward in life, and you're gonna have obstacles that happen to you that are outside of your control too. Like sometimes bad things are going to happen that you don't have control over, and you need to learn that this is how we can take this situation and flip it so that we can come out maybe better, but at least status quo.
Exactly. You have those skills to get up, try again.
So this brings us to our main topic, making space for and creating the environment for innovation in schools. Because innovation is one of those words we go back and forth and look at definitions, and it gets bandied about in the school world. But making a space for creating an environment for innovation. And I think there's something to be said about being a helicopter teacher versus a lawnmower teacher. I'm going to throw it back out there, right? Like, I'm going to put supports in place to get kids where they need to be, but they need to experience that struggle. I'm not going to do the work for them, right? That's the student's not going to benefit from that, and I'm not benefiting because I know how to do it already. And so I think juggling those things of being a helicopter teacher and supporting and watching from afar, hovering over and making sure they're going to be successful, and watching them go through struggle or and then have that moment of success versus going through and doing the work for our students. And I think there's a balance within that, and I think we need to nurture this idea of letting kids explore things on their own.
That's when the innovation happens. It's not something you can program in. Okay, kids, we're innovating right now. From 1:45 to 2:20.
We're gonna be innovative.
We're the innovators. It's on the board. We set it in the schedule. It's become this term that I think has lost value or has really confused value right now because it's such a popular thing to just say. I feel like it's in The Princess Bride. When you use the term innovation in schools, I don't think it means what people think it means. And so we did a little bit of digging to think about what do we mean, what might some other people mean when we say innovate, innovating, innovation, innovators, and what does that look like?
Yeah. Just looking up different things, Merriam-Webster defines it as characterized by tending to or introducing innovations. But there was another one too where it said we bring about something new or have a new look on an old thing. And I kind of like that one a lot more because it doesn't mention anything about technology, because that's the one thing in the education world right now. It's like, oh, well, we have technology, so we're innovative.
Wow.
Aaron and I laugh a lot about that because just having technology doesn't make you innovative. Having technology can make you lead to innovation, but if you're just giving kids a worksheet that's digital versus a worksheet that's paper, there's nothing necessarily innovative in that. It's the ideas and processes. Can you do something that you couldn't previously do with technology? That's the innovative part.
That is the innovative part. And so one of the things, of course, we talk about, there is benefit to making something that's on paper digital if you do things like add in accessibility and do ADA compliance on that. So we're not trying to diminish any of the wonderful things that technology has done. At the same time, we wouldn't call that innovation just to have those digital representations in mind. Just handing a kid the newest, fanciest fill in the blank doesn't mean that they're suddenly going to solve some sort of world magical problem and be the next anybody that's a fancy inventor. Because when you define innovation as creating something new, it's kind of an easy checkpoint, right? It doesn't need to be this long, complex thing. Do we really have something new here? The other side to that is just because we don't, that's not a bad thing. Mm-hmm. And so when you're looking at something that exists and you're making a new style to it or a new movement or you're taking it to a new level, that's kind of what you want to think about. That could be that way that you assess, what are we really doing here? Where's our purpose?
And one of the other things is, do we need every child to be an innovator and an inventor? I mean, honestly, I don't think we do, right? We need people to find what they're passionate about and, find something that they want to do for the rest of their lives. You know what? We need welders. We need carpenters. It doesn't mean you have to be this creative, massive architectural genius, right? But if you can build good buildings and, you know how to weld and you know how to do these things really well, you can have a very successful and happy life, right? Like, I think that should be more of the focus is the emotional, what do you want to be when you grow up? I want to be happy, right? Instead of, I want to be an astronaut. No, there's nothing wrong with being an astronaut, but not everyone can be an astronaut.
Well, I think it became really trendy for adults to say that they're turning every kid into an innovator, and I kind of blame a lot of this on the need for funding and a lot of grants and tech and all that. And we know that technology really has revolutionized education. We need to get some. We're really strapped for cash. If we apply for these things or we get these audiences, we're more likely to be able to bring that in where we haven't been able to before. And so that's kind of I think one of the reasons why we got into this habit. And, to say in a system that all kids are innovating, I think it's irresponsible at best. And I think, like you're saying, it's potentially harmful in the other light because we create undue expectations when we misuse these terms with the purpose of putting a metaphorical shine on a school system or programs or children, let alone the many situations where innovation, like you said, it isn't necessary and it isn't appropriate. And on top of that, you were mentioning some careers that are awesome, huge STEM careers that require students to be really strong in all these skills and abilities. And I think that innovation, just as much as we'd all like to think that we're sitting under an apple tree and an apple hits us and we're like, oh my gosh, I'm going to change the way we think about science. I think a lot of the innovators, and innovating, if you look at the news lately, is from people who are found that passion, are in that industry, invested their background knowledge and time to do the things, and then over time went, wait a minute, they found something in the system, wondered about it, and then they were able to come up with something new. So that's the other piece that I feel we lose out on.
And two things that pop up in my mind too is one, Mozart, all of these great composers or artists and these people who are innovative and creative, they create lots of things. Like it's a quantity over quality thing, and if you produce enough, eventually you're going to get stuff that's just completely mind-blowing and different and all of these different things. And so the idea that you can just like have one idea that's it's gonna be the end-all be-all is just, it may happen occasionally, but most of the time when it does, it's just because you're really putting a lot of stuff out there into the world and tweaking what has been done before. Like you and I were talking last week, not everyone I need to meet needs to be innovative. My wife and I refinanced our house. I don't want my finance person to be that innovative, because the last time that happened, I think we had the Great Recession because we got really too creative with the money and the numbers and all of these things. And I want someone that knows how to cross their T's and dot their lowercase J's. That's what I want when I'm refinancing. I don't want someone to necessarily be innovative in that aspect.
No. And so this is where more of that issue lies. It's where we create the wrong value for innovation. In full recognition of the leaps and bounds we've made, the monumental effects that innovations have made on humanity, let alone my life as an educator over my career, we have to watch how we talk about it. It's a category within a system in which each component is valued for the way it supports the others. We don't want students to sit through their math class or their math experience and feel like they have to come up with the math. Yes, we want them to work through math and to discover how pieces go together so that they have a better understanding. But some of that needs to happen and is valuable as well. If everyone was innovating all the time, if that was even possible, we would miss out also on the cycles of prototyping, evaluating, reimagining, having people say, that's a really cool idea, but wait a minute, you want to sell it to this market and that market has these needs that we need to meet as well. Or how can we make that message palatable to investors, or something that even translates to the sourcing that you're looking for? So we need all of the pieces of the design cycle, not just constant innovation. That makes me tired to even think about.
And, we want an informed society that supports innovation. We want people to vote. We want people to do their part to back positive change. And so, we have to sit and look at what is the real purpose of education, right? What is it that we want our children and our students to get out of going to school? For me, I want an informed society. That's my biggest thing. I want people to vote. I want, like we just said, because I think what we have in this country is something truly remarkable, and a lot of other countries think so too. They've tried to implement and emulate us. And it's kind of fascinating for me right now as a social studies teacher to see what's going on in Washington, D.C., based off of rules that were written 240 plus years ago, right? It's a new interpretation of all of this stuff. The founders were innovative in that aspect. They allowed for these things and these rules in place to challenge one another and keep people in check. And I want my students to understand that there is no set outcome to what's going to happen right now. We don't know. But we can follow along and try to understand where these rules were put in place, and want students to be informed citizens so that they can just make up their mind for their own, right? And think critically. I think that's the biggest thing and if we can teach kids to think critically, then they can hit any problem that comes to them later on in life, look at all the evidence and come up with a solution that works best for them, or a decision that works best for them and their families.
I love how you said the founders were innovative, and I want to highlight the word were, because I think, and I am related to one of them, so I'm super excited, and I love history. It was fantastic to go and see where they sat and signed and all of this magic. And at the same time, I think some of what's going on politically, people are tying it down to those original ideas, and I can't speak for the founders of the country, but I would like to think that had they been available now, their ideas would have changed and been it's not about trying to keep the country exactly how it was. That's how innovation back then. I think that if those same founders were available now, they would have all these new and different ideas of, we didn't anticipate treating all these people
That's
equally.
why we have 27 amendments to our Constitution,
Exactly.
and possibly 28th now with the Equal Rights Amendment actually passing in Virginia. I mean, they knew what they were doing was not perfect. Mm-hmm. They knew they wanted to create something that could change over time.
Absolutely.
Right? And so this whole idea of, and I just want civil discourse over these things. That's what I want. out of the students, and be able to look at things and talk it out and not scream at one another.
Yes. And so depending on your role in education, you might experience the power of innovation in different ways. So again, we just talked about how in social studies, what would that look like now if we had those people here addressing today's challenges? You might be the creator, you might be the recipient of what's going on, but the bigger question is, are you a supporter or are you creating a barrier for what's going to happen? And so I like to think about that. And not to say that barriers don't have roles too. That's why we have things like laws. But are we unpacking them, peeling back layers, and taking a look at the true purpose?
Yeah, like what's the red tape that politicians are putting in place to block innovation? Or, even as a teacher, what's some of the red tape or preconceived biases that you might have about certain students or something like that, and saying, well, I don't think they could do this, but that's red tape.
Yeah, that's a hot button for me. I really, it's disappointing to me to hear when students are grouped with assumptions. Mm-hmm. Period. And so I absolutely think that you as the teacher, as well-meaning as you may be, or as you are trying to manage your job and make it something doable, I think at the same time you absolutely can create barriers that will limit students, and what a heartbreaking thing to have done. And so when we take that time to self-assess and address where we're at, I think we can change the way that we teach and the faith that we have and what's going to come of it.
This gets into just the physical space too that we teach our students in. Are we lining them up in rows and just saying, okay, like the sage on the stage?
Sage on the stage. Rows. Oof.
It's you came into it's kind of interesting as being in a brand new school, and the very first thing I did was take all of the rows that were set up and put them in bunches and groups and stuff. I want my students learning to look at one another and talk to one another and collaborate with one another. And to some people that may seem silly, but as something as simple as turning desks towards one another, I think changes that mindset, because then when the kids come in and be like, oh, it's not about the teacher or the person in the front of the room or the back of the room or wherever you're presenting, it's about us as a little group, it's us as a class, it's us as a little mini society, right? And they feel more valued in that as well.
Yes, I think the rows really bug us, that we're going to admit this. I think it dilutes resources, so then they're not available. And why would you do that? By choice. And that's not to say that we completely disagree with ever putting rows for any reason, because sometimes people want to be in their own little spot. But if that's kind of like you said, the physical space, the learning environment, the overall structure that you've created, my question is going to be, okay, so when are you building in the collaboration piece? How are you building that in? Because if it's not something that students are experiencing physically, I'm not sure it's always going to manifest in other ways as well. And it kind of freaks me out, because then I worry about the kids. What are they missing out on with so little access to each other? We know that schools, the best that all districts do with the money they have, we still have more students than we know based on data is the best situation to have in a classroom, and everyone's doing the best they can there. So knowing that, I think it really behooves the teacher to make any kind of instructional choice they can to maximize collaboration.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I mean, it's just, if we want our students and our next generation to learn how to talk to one another, people complain all the time, oh, they don't know how to talk to one another, just on their phones all the time. Okay. Well, then force them to look at one another, right? And you're not going to act a certain way towards someone when you have to look them in the eye and say words and they hear them coming out of your mouth, versus if you're just talking and communicating with someone digitally, there is a different communication tone with all of that stuff. And if we ultimately want our society to grow and get better and be more innovative with our ideas and more inclusive and become this ideal society, we need to learn how to talk to one another. And if we don't do that face to face, it's not to say that digital tools have their place. I can have a chat with my friend in Australia, which is just completely, like, when I sit and think about that, like, it's awesome.
Cool.
It is cool.
Yeah.
It's just cool.
It's cool.
But that's not how, like, that's how he and I have to communicate. But we still liked sitting down for, like, a cup of coffee at ISTE last year, right? And meeting face-to-face and learning how to do all that stuff. And so we need to not just go by this old status quo, because if we look at school and the history of it, it was set up during an industrial revolution, right? It was meant to teach kids these basics so that we could have more workers for factories. Mm-hmm. Well, let's face it, we're not a manufacturing economy anymore.
No.
We're not. We're a service. And, what you need to do in service? Communicate.
Yes. And we reap what we sow. So if we're saying yes, we're smarter together, we know the 4 C's. We hear this in staff meetings all around the country, people saying these things, but why are we learning apart? And I think that goes for adults too, because acting on what matters, I think, is just one step toward creating these environments. And it goes for teachers too. If there's not the opportunity for adults to come together and make a podcast, because why not? When are these occurrences going to happen in the course of your school year? And I think you lose out on that human capital piece.
And to that part of being innovative, you have to allow yourself as a teacher to try something new. And guess what? It might not go perfectly the first time.
It might bomb.
But
really
that's
bad.
Okay. Because just as I tell the kids, like, it's your first attempt. It's your first try at this. We're going to learn a lot of what not to do when we do it. And that's what, like, I know we'll talk PBL here in just a second too, and how that can, like, really allow people to be innovative. And we're right in the midst of this massive History Day project at our school, and one of the things I love is watching the kids, like, make a couple mistakes here, or watching them build all these things, and they're measuring things out. Oh, I missed this by 1/4 of an inch, and, like, oh, but we can fix it this way, or, like, I'm out of supplies, so how are you going to make this work now? And watching the kids just come up with different ideas, like, hey, let's cut these tiny strips of wood, and this will be our, new L bracket and stuff like that. And guess what? It works.
It works.
Right? They problem solved. They work together in teams, and, watching so many of these kids work together with their hands and doing these different things, like, it's astonishing. I love just standing back and watching them operate sometimes, because they come through every time. They do. And that's where, like, but I as a teacher have to realize that, like, I need to let go, right? And just kind of let them go and do their thing and be there to support them when they absolutely need it. But they may not need it.
It's absolutely about allowing kids to experiment, showcase. What role do they want? Sometimes they want to be the person who's just let loose and create, and then sometimes they really enjoy being the person who checks back the criteria and constraints of the challenge and says, hey, wait a minute, what about this? So when allowing for this to happen in project-based learning, problem-based learning, any of these learning models, I think it really supports in-action and on-action reflection, which is so important, because when you're in the middle of the, what do I do about this L bracket that I need? I love listening to students sort through those hiccups, and just seems like when everything's about to fall apart and everything's lost and, we're all frustrated, if you give them that time to walk through that, they figure it out, something awesome comes of it, and they're flying again.
Yeah. And I just, one of the side notes is, like, I know we're going to have our big event on Thursday, and then, like, I get to bring some teams onto regionals, and I already have some kids like, man, I wish I had a little bit more time, because I would love to do this, but, like, if I move on, this is what we want to do. Like, they're already thinking through, like, 3 or 4 designs ahead. Like, because they also realize that, like, hey, you know what? I might not be able to get this grand idea done in this amount of time, but we're going to make it as good as we can for right now, and then hopefully that gets us to this point where we get to move on and redo it. And, like, one of the fun things I love watching is, like, you have kids that are moving on to regionals, and then you come on the next day and their thing is stripped down to the bones. You're like, huh? They're like, oh, well, we're going to start over, we're going to do this better. And, like, allowing kids that process is exactly what we want them to do, because they're learning how to work together as a team, they're learning how to think through things, they're learning how to problem solve, they're designing, they're being innovative with the project that's in front of them.
And I think that's matched in what teachers do. As far as you run through a project and it's something like History Day, we're familiar with that. We know how that's what things we need, what some likely outcomes of that, how long it's going to take, etc. I think the same thing happens with teachers, because then there's that discussion, well, okay, next year it's going to look like this. Mm-hmm. So before you're even done, you're already on to that.
Oh, Brad and I have already discussed that like 5 times. Like, oh, well, what about this? And, as we just did things in a brand new space this year, so who knew how things were going to go? And
that's okay.
other teachers would be like, oh, this is cool. Can I, that's what I hope too, is can we bring in new teachers and and tie in other classes to some of these things too, so that students can see even more connections between all of their subject areas.
And part of that, I think, comes from walking students through the choices you make as an educator too, being really clear about, oh, okay, I thought we were going to do this in the project, but now we're going to move forward with this. You set them up for those tools and you model them for children. And I think that's a lot what parents do. Oh, you're paying bills. Well, I need to check that the money I have matches what I need to pay out, and then I know I'm going to spend this much going forward. And next year, when this comes up, I'm going to be differently prepared and all of that. So these are opportunities that not only lead to a stronger outcome, I think, but also really make learning and iterative processes clear for children so that they can emulate that.
Mm-hmm. And, it's creating an environment where you can get transferable skills to students, right? Like citing sources. Why is that important? Well, where are you getting your information from? Right? Like, what are your facts? What's your evidence? There's many different ways to cite sources, right? I'm going to show them one way. You're going to show them another way. Some professor at college might show them another third or fourth way, because there's, 80 different things listed in the book. But the main thing is, can you make a claim, support it with evidence, and then do so, in this case, visually, or, through words, or all these different constraints that we put on students. But it ends up, think critically. It's just like when you're buying a car, like you're just saying, you need to measure all the different things. How much money do I have? What type of loan can I get? What do I want in a car? And what's available, and knowing how to weigh all of those different things and make an informed decision about it.
And I think when you do that, you're distilling it down to the whole purpose of what's happening. And if you're trying to give students that strong base from which to move forward, and if it means innovating from there, cool. If it means supporting that, great. But you want to get down to those skills. And a lot of that, when we're talking about innovations, is protecting people and their intellectual property, the physical property, and things that they've created. And, I think that one of the ways that teachers can support this process when you're coaching and building those skills is to give away every single choice you can to students. When you're looking through your lessons, your units, your structures, comb through and see where you can let go. So do you really need to only give them these 3 choices? Can you make it broad? Can you make a choice D that's come up with one of your own? And, put some barriers in there so, you have a week to come up with one of your own. That way we're not lost at the end when we need to move on. But really making that place for students to take over and to own what's happening. And the other side to that is, I always get educators who say, why can't we just have one system? And I hear you. I really do. It would be so great if we just had one digital or even, paperwork system with our districts, but it's just not realistic. Students are going to be exposed to so many digital resources, hardware, software, firmware, all of that throughout their lives. It's not responsible for us to only teach one way. It's just like with citations. We don't want to teach them that MLA or APA or Chicago style is all they're ever going to experience, because it's just not equal. So yes, while it would be easier for me to just have one system that students use, it's just not, it doesn't parallel.
It's not realistic.
No, it's not. And we're not helping them with their careers if that's our mindset.
Right. But if we can show them the tools on how to do all of this stuff, then they can be successful no matter what their professor later on down the road says. Or, it doesn't matter, because they know how to think through things. And constraints can be a very, very good thing with those. I know when we talk constitutional issues. I know some teachers will be like, oh, we're only going to look at the First Amendment. Okay, well, like, why? Because what's important to our students might not fit that. But if they're learning how to voice their opinion and interpret the Constitution, I don't care which amendment they're looking at. Or, and every student's going to have their own little take on it. And, it's like, hey, we're going to focus in, I'm going to show you these 3 or 4, because these are kind of maybe like big ones that are in the news and stuff. But I've had many students come up and say, well, what about this? This is an issue that I'm passionate about. I'm never going to tell a student no. And
Exactly.
Because I'm going to instead amplify their voice and show them how they can take a topic that they're passionate about and understand how it relates back to the Constitution, and then amplify their voice by writing their senator or congressperson.
Well, and it's along those lines that we talked about. Also, historically, what was important first, so the First Amendment, versus those that have come since then, it's important to look at the full spectrum in a way. Not memorize all of them,
Right.
but look at those different foci and consider that as well.
Because they're important in different ways.
Yeah, and how have those things come about? And then you can really talk about what might come up moving forward, because you're expanding students' exposure to innovations, because those were innovative ways of thinking when they came out, and the processes used to actualize them. And that's the other part that comes through. If all we're ever doing is just banking ideas, we're not teaching students that struggle, that strife that often comes along with taking your new idea and making it happen. And we talked about the lawnmower.
What's the application of it?
Yes, and with the parenting styles or the teaching styles that just take away all of that work, instead of teaching the energy, the blood, sweat, and tears that has to go into that. So you can follow a Kickstarter project, for example, research some modern day inventors and everything that they did to set themselves up. Look at groups and people from other countries that have completely different needs than we do, or who are trying to solve things at a larger scale than we are. And otherwise connect with other people outside of your classroom or the prototypical inventor that's in every old textbook, and build appreciation for the work behind that.
Because, like, science, I don't think necessarily changes, but the ideas do, right? Different things are discovered at different times, and we find out, hey, well, maybe this wasn't right, and now this is. What was it? The NASA intern discovered a new moon or planet within 3 days of being there.
Way cool.
Wait, yeah. I mean, that's it's.
But how much work did a person have to do to get to be a NASA intern? And that's the thing we often forget to showcase, or that we try to eliminate all of that work, not putting value in all of that.
And one of the biggest things that I think we can do as educators is we have to reach outside our comfort zones. A lot of times that's growing our PLNs. And so this is where, once again, technology can be innovative.
Personal learning network.
Yes.
Okay.
We can meet teachers or communicate with teachers across the globe using Twitter. And people are like, oh, I love Twitter. Yes,
Me
there's
too.
a lot
Me
of
too.
stuff on there that's probably garbage.
Total junk. True.
But if you're following the right people, or just so many different
thinkers.
project ideas, there's
Yeah.
the mango tree, or I sent you a video about protecting the shorelines with different types of trees or something like that. That's going to be a project idea for next year, to talk to, how do we rebuild coastlines after hurricanes and stuff like that? Or how do we protect them?
New dinosaur skeletons that create a stronger link between birds that will end up informing flight when we're correcting some of these plane and other issues that have come up in science.
And
cool stuff.
And it's stepping outside your bounds and just saying, you know what, I'm okay with not, my graduate teacher said all of us are smarter than one of us. And it's just it's in the classroom it's true, and I think in our PLNs it's true. You may find ideas from other educators, and you may inspire someone else and not even know it.
And I think sometimes when you're trying to do things that are outside of the system that you're in, whether that's just your school or a district or a state, it helps to have somewhere to go that's not part of that system, to find out that you're not alone. It may feel very lonely to be doing things differently or to advocate for things differently when all you're doing is coming against the no's and the we can'ts, and there's no way to, and then, not going to do it. So when you reach out of that comfort zone and you look for like-minded people, you find them. And it's like the story that I knew I needed to meet John before I worked with John because he and I had some similar thinking on a project that we hadn't even met on.
Right.
So so those things happen, and it's great too because when we go to these conferences, we're both going to be at ISTE at the end of June, and we'll be broadcasting from there. And we were both talking about how much it will be great to see in person people that we mainly have to relate to digitally because they live in other parts of the country, but they'll be there, we'll be there, and the exciting, innovative practices that will come of that.
And we're getting a colleague
awesome.
to come with us this
Yeah.
time. So like it's can you get one more person? And if you do something that you think goes well in your class, guess what? Put it in for a conference.
Yeah.
You gotta
Share
we
it.
expect our students to get up and present to us, right? Well, why don't we do that too? And it may go poorly, but once again, like one of the last conferences, I presented to 3 people. But all 3 people were so ecstatically engaged with it that they're going to be implementing some of the things that I was doing in my classroom in their classroom, and that's just awesome.
I love it. And I also think that some of the ideas that I've come to appreciate have come from other parts of the globe, such as down in New Zealand. They have a lot of really cool practices happening when they removed some of those barriers. They took out some of the controls that didn't need to be there. And so a lot of that's discussed by the leaders of the Modern Learning podcast, which is one that I love. If you're wanting to think about innovation in education, what does that look like? What are changes on the horizon? What are some things you can do? I really recommend that learning community. They say that their work, like ours, is driven by questions, because that's all we do is have questions all day long. I feel like answers are we don't need answers. If we have questions, we're always going to be driving forward. And so our question for you, as we like to end each episode, is how innovation plays a part in your building or district. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe you're doing something really awesome. Are people balancing the value for innovation and the full process for what needs to happen to support it? So let us know by emailing us or checking in on social media.
This brings us to the end of episode 5 already. And we've got a couple little mini episodes. Still workshopping titles and stuff, but it's kind of been fun as Erin and I get into the new building to walk around and kind of record some stuff on the fly. But thank you so much for everyone that's been listening. We couldn't host a podcast without our listeners, and also to our amazing team here at the VPS offices who show up to let us use this space. They, especially the last episode, took a whole lot of extra editing and everything, and it just, I really enjoyed how it came out, and it wouldn't be possible without the people behind the scenes too.
Thank you, Ian and Nick.
So if what we talked about sparked your interest, if you found meaning and want to support a colleague, or you have ideas and want to highlight a colleague, just send it out to us. Let us know what's going on. Be interested to hear what your take is on lawnmower versus snowplow versus helicopter type parents and stuff like that. It's until next time, let's keep those conversations going.
Bye.